Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, the host of Opinion Journal at WSJ Video, joins me, and Mary and I are going to address tonight, right away, governance and its failure. And you can see this nationally in the instances that have been in the news recently. The story about the Secretary of the VA Affairs mentioning that the wait line at the VA was just like Disney World. The story about the head of the IRS, Koskinen, who is now being looked at by the House of Representatives for impeachment. And a story Mary did today with her colleague Joe Rago. Good evening, Mary.
Hi, good evening, John. Great to be with you.
About the Education Department, not where you'd think you would see executive overreach or executive branch overreach, but using Title IX as a weapon. What is that, Mary?
Well, John, I think you can expect government overreach everywhere, so I don't know if this is really such a surprise. The story is that the Department of Education is sending out what they call guidance letters to colleges across the country that take federal money. In other words, colleges, right, upon which they have a hammer and an available nail. And effectively what they've said is, we want you to punish people who have been accused of sexual harassment or sexual assault before any adult or legal team has heard their side of the story. We just want you to cut it off. So what I said to Joe is, first of all, is this legally binding? And he said, no, they're guidance letters, but that's how they make policy in the Department of Education. But secondly, apparently, if you set foot on a college campus, the Department of Education wants you to have fewer rights than in any other part of the country. It's absolutely insane.
Administrative state, it's called. That's the big Tony word, but we're joined now by Francis Rose, who is a reporter for this show for many years. Very happily now we congratulate him for his promotion into major media in Washington. Francis is the host of the National Defense Week on WMAL, the affiliate where we speak happily each week in Washington, but he is now to be congratulated as the host for the ABC affiliate in Washington, Channel 7. That's on Sunday morning at 10:30 in the morning. And then on the cable channel, Channel 8 in Washington, for a daily show about government matters. Francis, congratulations, and we plunge you immediately into the troubles of the federal government. First, Secretary McDonald. You and I have discussed Secretary McDonald for some months, as much as a year now, because he was brought in from private enterprise to correct the failures of the Veterans Affairs Department, especially the waiting lines and the investigations that involve the misbehavior by the VA employees. But his remark before Congress has very carefully upset everyone, because he threw away the idea of wait lines, saying that it's similar, the analogy to Disney World. Francis, I've been in lines at Disney World. They're wonderful. You're with children. You're happy. You're waiting for the Tower of Terror.
No, John. I've been in lines at Disney World, too. That is not my experience.
It's a treat to be in a line at Disney World, because you know the payoff is going to be the thrill of riding in an elevator that's going to drop. All right, Space Mountain. I'm for Tower of Terror. Francis, why did McDonald get in so much trouble in Washington for this? A very good evening to you.
Good evening, John and Mary, and thanks for the congratulations. And my wait time experience at Disney World comports more with Mary's than with yours. The furor erupted after this comment that he said that Disney doesn't keep track of wait times. Why should wait times be the metric or the only metric by which we're measured for success at the Department of Veterans Affairs? The underlying sentiment was actually on target. A lot of people who are following this believe wait times is certainly a significant metric that VA should be measured on, but not the only one. Secretary McDonald suggested in the rest of his comments that we should also be measured on, quite honestly, some areas where VA is not doing well but believes that it's improving, such as the quality of the care that they deliver. What's the outcome to the veteran after he or she is seen in the system? So it was really the structure of the comments that he made, using the Disney reference and comparing veterans' health care to something that a lot of people took as very lighthearted and maybe even superficial, such as waiting in line for a ride at Disney World.
But that is often the problem of businessmen when they go into politics, right, Francis? It doesn't work the way it does when you're CEO of Procter & Gamble. You don't say something and then expect the troops to simply fall in line. Politics is a different game.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mary. And the scrutiny that these folks are under when they're leading an organization like a federal government agency, it's not just the money that's involved. I mean, some of the private sector companies that people have come into government and led are not as large dollar-wise as the companies that they've led in the private sector. I don't know the market cap of Procter & Gamble to be able to say about Secretary McDonald specifically, but it's just a whole different ballgame, and the Washington streets are littered with newspapers about people, including articles about people who have had all kinds of difficulties, such as Secretary McDonald has had.
The IRS, I mentioned that earlier, and Mr. Koskinen is in trouble with Jason Chaffetz, who is the chairman of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. They're now talking about impeachment. This has to do with what they use this wonderful English word, flout. I love the word flout. You flouted. He flouted the committee in their investigation of the misbehavior of the IRS before he arrived. But they're saying that he lied to them, and he flouted a congressional subpoena. Francis, is this partisan politics as usual, or is Koskinen being exposed by the administration in some unusual fashion?
I think it depends who you ask, John. If this is, if you ask the Republican members of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, this is a tremendous misbehavior issue, if not a crime, committed by Mr. Koskinen. If you ask the Democrats on that same committee, and if you ask some Republicans on the on the Senate side, it's completely partisan. The problem that the House Republicans are having is right now mostly driven by Orrin Hatch, senator from Utah and a longtime senator from Utah. Senator Hatch told some media outlets here in Washington today that he has not seen the issues with Mr. Koskinen and the timeline of information that the IRS has released, the actual information itself. He hasn't seen that the way that the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee members have seen it. So there's a potential here that the situation with Koskinen at the IRS could turn into a far more partisan issue than it's been in the past.
And yet there was news today, Francis, I think also from this hearing, that the IRS has seized citizens' bank accounts with very little due process, and that was an error that Koskinen realized and is moving to correct. But it seems that you have an agency that at every turn is expanding its power or abusing its power. And in some instances, like today, he seems to admit it.
Which is the theme of our conversation here, overreach by the administrative state. Please continue, Francis.
Yeah, and John and Mary, that's exactly the same issue that Mr. Koskinen dealt with today, that John and I have talked about on any number of occasions, and sometimes you as well, Mary, about Mr. McDonald at VA. How much control can one person at the top of an agency so large, with so many people doing so many different things, really exert? How much can Mr. Koskinen really correct in the 2.5 years that he's been in the job so far and in the 1.5 years that he has remaining? How much change can Mr. McDonald exert in the 18 months or so that he's been in so far and in the probably only 8 months or so that he'll continue at the top of the VA?
Well, I don't know if we should give them a pass, given
I'm not suggesting we give them a pass,
given the obstinance of especially of Koskinen. But my question for you, Francis, is one of political leadership from their boss, which is the president. If they're going to make really radical changes, shouldn't that be driven from the White House? And if so, why is that not happening?
Well, that's a question that would have to go to the White House. But like I said, I'm not suggesting that we give them a pass, but I am suggesting that a lot of these organizations, when people really sit down and look at them from a managerial perspective and separate out the fact that they're government agencies, are amazingly difficult to operate. Now, a lot of people have suggested that means a terrific role for the House Oversight Committee and the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to try to look at these organizations and take them apart and put them back together again. That requires, though, as you suggest, cooperation from the White House, particularly in the federal government from the Office of Management and Budget. So far in this administration, the Office of Management and Budget hasn't really demonstrated much of an appetite. They could demonstrate that appetite if the White House told them to, but apparently that's not happening.
Let's have some fun with this, because we understand and we can be sober about the administrative state, but there's a little quiz here. We can all take it. Francis first. Francis, it's 2017, and we're building that wall, 1,000 miles long along Mexico. This is a theme that Dan Henniger of the Wall Street Journal takes me to. We're building that wall, and the government's been assigned to build that wall. How long will it take to build that wall, Francis, given what we know about how government bureaucracy works?
I'm going to plead the fifth on that question, John. It depends what kind of wall they want to build.
All right. In this century, Francis?
If it's a bricks and mortar wall, God only knows, John.
Mary, in this century?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's like the Second Avenue subway in New York, John. It's always going to be built next year.
Mary knows about the Second Avenue subway because it's a famous vaporware. That's what it is. All right. That's why, Francis, in discovering these issues with the IRS, which is out of control and always has been, it was conceived out of control about 100 years ago, and the VA, which has recently run out of control, and the TSA, which is out of control. Francis, we're describing a government that can't build a wall, aren't we? There'll be a bureaucracy, but no wall.
Well, we've discussed on any number of occasions the problems that we've seen at agencies across government, John, you and I have. The bad rap that the government gets is there are things that they do well. They don't get a lot of coverage because they're not sexy, and they're also, in many cases, not very high profile. The government delivers Social Security benefits to people across the country on a timely basis. There are lots of other services that they provide that are not controversial regarding politics or ideology. Unfortunately, those aren't the programs that tend to make it on the front pages of newspapers or the interviews on radio.
Francis Rose, the host of Government Matters, Channel 7, 10:30 in the morning, Washington time. This is East Coast time on the ABC affiliate, Channel 7 in Washington, and the host also on the cable channel, Channel 8, 8:30 to 9 each day, 7 days a week, on Government Matters. He's also the host of National Defense Week on WMAL. Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, and the host of Opinion Journal at WSJ Video. And I'm John Batchelor.